Squid Game Season 2 is fundamentally flawed. Starting by the name, why didn't they call it Octopus Game? And not just because they pulled the classic Netflix move where they slop out half a season and divide it in two. Talking about an issue that shows up in episode 1 and is later shut down during the season finale. But don't be worried about spoilers, there's none here. Anyways, welcome to my analysis of Squid Game's Bisexual Lighting Edition. Jihong's about to drop the hardest video essay about, I don't know, the eggplant emoji? You know, sometimes you don't have to walk far from the tree to find the issue, because she's literally standing right below it. Let's talk about the games part of Squid Game Season 2. Classic messing up the title, am I right? Like, the main thing that brings pressure into the show is distinctly the games, and Squid Game is the kind of show that shines primarily on tension. And I'm not gonna deny the minute-to-minute tension of this season isn't as good as the first. Not only are the writers good in regards to making a stressful experience, but the format itself is just great. I've watched 2 Spanish tweet rivals based on Squid Games with horrible pacing. I'm still getting nervous when the Minecraft guy punches the other Minecraft guy. But if the experience has taught me anything, it's mostly how the tension is dissipated when the game featured in the experience is badly designed. Squid Game is a show that by its premise, the stakes will always be at an all-time high. It's death, kaput, mortis. And that being a never-changing rule will achieve a base-level amount of tension. Many fictional stories that establish a game fail at this by making the stakes either too big or too small. So that's something going for Squid Game. The problem is that it falls apart at the second most important question: how do the characters lose? Notice, not win. When the stakes are high enough, the players of any game focus not on winning, but on not losing. The game the audience technically plays by rooting for a character included. So let's look at an example from the first season. Marbles. Not only is this game brilliantly set up, but it also locks characters into a scenario where one dies and the other survives. The players are then allowed to choose any modality they want of several relatively similar games, all of which have different conditions. Immediately, every match has gained emotional weight and most importantly, is varied. You can see how the character you are cheering on is doing every time the show cuts back to them, and this is achieved by adding variance to the question, how do the characters lose? Notice how every game in the first season has unavoidable tales of how players are doing throughout, how much of the cookie is broken, how close to the safe spot they are. Now, let's look at Season 2's games. First off, Red Light, Green Light. It's a holdout from the first season because of course it forced the iconic thing back into relevance, so it's not badly designed. Plus, it serves to introduce the new characters in this bisexual edition, while putting the protagonist into a protector role, so no complaints there beyond the larger issue, which I'll be talking about way later. Next, Four-Legged Race, stacked with 5 minigames of traditional Korean games. In order to lose this game, one or several of the teammates has to be weak for about 2 minutes of wasted time. Essentially, it's a race against the clock, and that clock is the only piece of information that directly tells us about the performance of the players. The reason this is intense is because first, we don't actually know if the characters are bad at their designated game, but second, the timer being separate from the game means the audience whose perspective is stuck to one point of view can't consider the losing condition unless the show tells them directly. It's important to be able to tell how the players are doing at any time regardless of what's actually happening. Next is Rock, Paper, Scissors, which fails because it's round-based and spontaneous. The results are delivered straight after the round ends, leaving no time for the audience to ponder the state of the game. At least that very speed makes it carry great momentum, and I'm not surprised if you think this is the best part of the show this season, which, if you do, maybe give Kakegurui a shot? And I wish I had more to say about the third game showcased in this season, Mingle, where players fail if they don't complete their group or have extras. It runs into the same problems, with the crux of the pressure being on that specific situation that the writers select for our watching. Hey, this is linked very closely to my next talking point in a different way, because the third most important question happens to be, what do the writers want, and also what are they on, can someone tell? Allow me to say this, Season 1 is extremely predictable to anyone who has ever dabbled in the Battle Royale genre, and one of the reasons why this second season doesn't work is because the viewers have just dabbled in it through their prior season. Things such as the bad guy being incognito as the weakest of the players may be a little more advanced, but like the fact that something will go different than it should to separate the protagonist from other winners of the game is a given. Then the clearest issue of this genre overall is the solitary winner precondition, forcing the protagonist to live until the end. In less words, why should I give a fuck about anyone who isn't the protagonist? Yes, I have played Danganronpa B3. By its promise, it's hard for the audience to truly connect with the characters in a story designed to kill most of them. This is a problem that plagued the first season and the second more, with attempts to mitigate it by making characters relatable or particularly problematic, but the fact remains that their relevance to the plot is an unavoidable tragedy. I think the first season managed to get away with to introducing this type of battle royale to a Western audience, an audience that has now grown wary of their tricks. No matter how relatable or thought-provoking a character is, by this rule, audiences may connect to their issues, but never to their characters. Hyung-Yoo from this season is a perfect example. Though the character is beyond the MVP of the season, you end up appreciating her struggle more than her character. It becomes extremely transparent to see what the writers want from them first and what the audience would hope for them second. They did 2 things to try to mitigate this. Number 1 is that they upped the important character count, where the first season had 3 focused characters and a further array of 12 tertiary characters with less featured storylines. Season 2 wants to explore 16 characters with 14 having equal focus as secondary, unsurprisingly leading to major hurdles. The second thing they did is heavily heavily featured the boat system, which gave us the bisexual lighting, so that's a win, even though it feels like a huge modification made specifically to please Gi-hun's minigame, and I guess they designed and installed all of the relevant components for it in like a day, but it does let the viewer be aware of the potential that their favorite character has the possibility of survival. This would be mega smart if it didn't contribute to yet another fundamental issue. The second season adores wasting your time, and not in the sense that it feels like they are trying to extend the show to last longer, more so in the sense that they didn't notice where all the petted elements are. For starters, the voting system is peripheral in most scenarios, for the simple reason that the game, in its current state, cannot end in any of the episodes before 6. Note that this problem would be even more evident if they had released the season whole. You may argue that removing the voting aspect would be an improvement then, but you would end up leaving the main character literally out of a job. He'd have no goal, hence why this voting angle is flawed. There's no way to work around its lack of impact for the audience without removing its true purpose, which is to justify the entire story for this season. But it keeps getting broader. Sure, you get about 20 minutes of the total runtime dedicated to voting, but at least its inclusion is justified. Same thing with, say, how episode 4 dedicates 10 minutes to showing randos play a game because they have no intention to kill anyone who is relevant yet. They intend to show why this game is challenging and potentially deadly. The same cannot be said for, well, the first 2 entire episodes of the show. The first 2 episodes of this season prove the biggest problem with this season's fundamental failings, but I'll discuss that closer to the end of the video when my point would be clearer. The gist of it is that the show sabotages the things it established for the sake of tension. Elements such as the characters formulating a plan for the first 2 episodes that is ultimately and entirely thwarted by episode 3. Even though they spend the time to set up justification for why the story starts here, it's practically pointless. And let's not even get into the boat stuff that in addition of being poorly set up, it can be summarized to, you have 13 seconds before the island fucking explodes, you hot topic wannabe, and you blue gumbled son of a bitch. But the real touche here is the other almost fundamental issue, one that wastes time and is a core aspect to the protagonist's portrayal. Because season 1 has 3 characters who survived, they all show up here. 2 in major roles and 1 appearing sometimes to remind the audience that he is still relevant, with the protagonist, Gi-hun, having a huge personality shift, one that is acknowledged by the show and promptly dismissed. And it does play into the overall character journey well, but it also stops him from having control. The 2 types of character writing from my perspective are proactive and reactive. A proactive character is often much more compelling to watch because they take initiative and move the story forward. They act. Meanwhile, a reactive character waits for an outside element to force them into progress. They react. I think this is the main change Gi-hun underwent this season. In the first season, he was generally proactive as an individual, particularly because his goal was to survive and so the writers had to make his victory believable. Then in the second season, he is forced to act after events have happened because otherwise, he is liable to control the situation and make the audience feel like he isn't in any true danger. But he only becomes proactive at the end, during the final episode. That's not to say he shouldn't have changed. After the events of the first season, progression in his character was basically obligatory, but his actions don't align with the new ideals they established for him whenever the situation needs to be tense. I wish that was the only problem with the characters. Season 2 introduces many new guys that work to different degrees. For example, Noel fills a necessary role in this season. Being a masked guard, it gives the audience a new perspective into the games, though I still think it's a little too similar to Juno's Season 1 role. At the very least, it avoids the fall square into this season's primary trap, which every other element falls for, but I'm not quite done showing you all the pieces to understand what a trap is. Similarly, Ino may be a little too on the nose for the context he finds himself in, such as him being the last team in the second game or him being 001 again. I've got little complaints about him though. It's a small decision to place a threat the audience knows but the characters don't. That's yet another stroke of genius for this concept, and it truly makes the audience question the character's goals to exploring the inevitable third season. A guy who falls for the same play twice. The problem is everyone else. I could go into specific character arcs. There's a character whose death holds non-dramatic payoff when it definitely should have, but to avoid spoilers, the broad strokes is that there's too much focus on too many characters all the time, even though their deaths are imminent and their nuances don't always have time to shine, particularly because the writers decided to separate the characters into 3 distinct groups that don't mingle till the final episode. Pun entirely unintended till I noticed it, and then it became intended. Basically, you get 3 storylines this season. I like to arbitrarily call them the Honk Honk, oh my god, funny Mr. Beast, and Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and I mean these nicknames fondly. These 3 have their own infighting and thus exist parallel to each other, mostly because if they did need to explore the character dynamics for any bigger of a group, they'd waste even more time telling us about characters that are liable to die. It makes individual arcs like interconnectivity for the sake of, you guessed it, tension. Yeah, before I get into the single biggest failure of the season, I guess I should point out that I don't hate the season. I believe that despite its shortcomings, there are good elements here, particularly the tension. You've heard me mention just how many of the writing choices are clearly conduits for creating a stressful experience. And my critique isn't walking towards saying choices made specifically to be nerve-wracking are bad. I actually think that all of those elements that I've complained about are more than fine, because my issue with this season is far more fundamental than any of its parts. If the season didn't have any weight to it, the result would be worse, and I cannot spin the narrative that this season was bad because the episode writers dropped the ball. They are more so a consequence of how the overall show's writing was handled. While the fundamentals are heavily linked to the details, they can still shine on their own right. Like, yeah, the show has a fundamental issue in its writing that sometimes results in self-contradiction, but that doesn't mean the details, such as pacing and scoring of a scene, are badly executed. On the contrary, I largely applaud how this season kept its momentum and feel from the first, despite its fundamental shortcomings. It's a great show, but it could have been so much more. Anyways, biggest problem inbound. Jihoon's hair should have remained red. This is a disservice to all Red Hot Carrot character. Okay, no, that's a joke. I'm actually mega glad they didn't give this stupid fucking hair color. Squid Game Season 2 continues the word of Squid Game, but it doesn't expand it. They are desperate to not extend the universe of the show, which results in a second season that doesn't find its natural progression, an issue you can see from the first episode where they try to find a single guy who was related to the games, practically neglecting natural questions about the dynamics of the show's universe. For example, how does managing of the project work? Who schedules? Who does everything? Who hires the guards? How are they vetted and what's their environment like? Who is designing the sets and props we see in the game? What about the workers who install the motherfucking 20-mile-long roof that opens up for the green light, red light game? I refuse to believe that it's all organized and executed by the guards we see on screen. Instead, the show tries to grab what it has already explained and works exclusively using those pieces, creating some insanely evident writing problems. For example, I'm gonna bring a tiny spoiler from episodes 1 and 3 that isn't exactly relevant to the season's important events, but you know, warning I guess is important. The first episode has Ji-gun using his earnings from the first game to place lookouts all over Seoul, the capital of South Korea, attempting to find the recruiter who slapped him in the face, called him a bitch, and gave him an invitation before. Almost with a few to even hint that the games may involve other people that set it up beyond what we saw in the first season. He spends at least 2 years hiring a gang to look for this recruiter, who they find on one of the last possible days, only to have a scene in episode 3 where we see footage of numerous new contestants getting slapped, being called bitches, and given invitations. Not only is this pretending like the games have no connections to the outside world beyond a single recruiter, which isn't even true based on how they literally show people connected to the games and their daily routines, plus the entire VIP system, of which I may add Gi-hun already belongs to by the way, but it also contradicts itself. How in the hell did no one see a similar situation happening earlier if there is proof that they did happen? This also opens the doors to many questions such as whether the games operate all across South Korea, and way more importantly, what qualifies someone to take a position as a recruiter in the first place. This is an avenue that other Battle Royale shows will always take in the second installment. Naturally, the large-scale operation we saw before is only a small side of the story, and the proper way to explore anything further would be by letting the audience in on the workings of the universe. We got glimpses of it through Noel, but they left everything vague on purpose, because the writers have no interest in exploring any of this. The reason this is wrong is not just because I wanted to see that, of course I did, but I genuinely believe that the show would have greatly benefited from this approach, because far too many of its issues I've explored here come as a result of returning Gi-hun to a player position. Let me explain how putting Gi-hun on the position of a guard during the games and having him take down the games internally works perfectly. 1. To avoid making the audience feel no interest in the new players they wish to introduce, they had to add some sort of disruption. They went for the voting system, which is framed through the games, but we know for a fact that there's no more room for development if the vote results in the end of the games. The plot demands they don't succeed. It also just happens and ends happening. This is instead a plan the audience can see progressing for someone to set up in the background of the operation, in secret, for however many episodes before shit is supposed to hit the fan, would make for a tense hook that allows the new characters to potentially survive. 2. Explanation of the new games with randos can be framed as a challenge to the protagonist, whose active goal is not to kill other players. Now you layer 2 sources of stress into the same situation. You could also intertwine the relationship between him, other guards, and other players into a tense situation. Imagine a scenario where a player knows there's a mole in the higher-ups and works with this information. 3. The protagonist now gets to be proactive by not acting immediately. He'd be constantly acting towards his goal, but moments of reactivity would feel natural due to him not being on familiar ground. 4. All the unnecessary padding could be replaced with more complicated goals, something harder to achieve that would need more information to be pulled off and thus would be perceived as useful by the audience as well as keeping tense. And most importantly, 5. It would allow for the expansion of the universe naturally, but not just in the physical world sense, but also on the metaphorical sense. The Squid Games are clearly a class allegory that you may have missed, and thus the second season literally spells out for you what the moral issue with the games is very early on. But why tell when you could show through the full picture? Consider the players perceive the guards as their enemies, and so does the audience by what they've been accustomed during the first season, while the guards depend on the higher-ups letting them keep their job and even allowing them to run illegal operations. They can't be made sympathetic by a willing writer. This leads to pretty clear allegories of an oppressed lower class, a conditioned middle class, and a high class of organizers that benefits the most out of the entire situation. You'd immediately be layering the show by visualizing each of these perspectives, and the system disruption that has to occur later would turn assumptions on their head. The sad part is that there's no intention to explore the world. Jihan literally says, "I don't care how you became their errand dog," to a guy who works for the games. And this highly potential direction is dismissed on purpose by the writers. They want the protagonist to fight from the bottom, so the misery of his situation reflects the misery of a real-life lower class. A decision I understand, but I'm not sure this realism is really worth losing the story's ability to go beyond the reflection of unfun reality. It feels like they were too scared to touch the almighty Squid Game of worldwide fame and high capitalistic power, for as much as the show critiques that very system. It feels like they didn't want to extrude from something great in fear of messing it up, in fear of people perceiving the show negatively if it was more realistic about its setting than about its metaphor, resulting in flawed writing and a depressing truth. Squid Game Season 2 is fundamentally flawed. After all, it's an unwilling piece, one that doesn't know how to make its writing, well, fun. But yeah, bring back the stupid fucking red hair.